Wonderful. Let me welcome the people who've just joined us again to this post-election hearing. The aim of the Campaign Finance Board in holding this hearing is to receive feedback on its work during the 2013 New York City elections. Judging from the lineup of panel discussions we have planned, and testimony from members of the public who are joining us, we should be getting plenty of helpful input. As many of you know, I joined the Campaign Finance Board as chair in the beginning of 2014. I know the New York City Campaign Finance Board by its sterling reputation in the campaign finance world and as an observer of its work. I look forward to the 4 panel discussions on the program today as an opportunity to learn more about the impact the Matching Funds program has on city elections. I'd like to welcome Michael Malbin, the Executive Director of the Campaign Finance Institute, and I now turn it over to the Campaign Finance Board's Executive Director, Amy Loprest, to start our first panel discussion. Again, thanks for being here.
I would like to also add my thanks to everyone for joining us today, even though the weather is so terrible. We are going to review the city's landmark campaign finance program during the recent election. The CFB has held hearings like this one following every citywide election since 1989, and they're a key element of our post-election evaluation of the program. This year, our hearing is organized around 4 panel discussions. We are so grateful to those speakers who have agreed to participate today. There will be also ample opportunity for the public to provide testimony to the board throughout the day, and due to the inclement weather, we will probably provide an opportunity for the public to testify again at our next board meeting to be held on March 13th. The board's review of the program will culminate in the publication of our post-election report in September 2014. In addition to this hearing, we are soliciting comments through surveys sent to candidates, campaign treasurers, independent spenders, and others. We will also perform a comprehensive analysis of the campaign finance data disclosed during the 2013 elections. Today's panel discussions will feature a preliminary analysis of the campaign finance data disclosed to the CFB over the past 4 years. The contribution and spending data presented in our materials is based on disclosures through the final disclosure statement of the 2013 election cycle due on January 15th. The CFB experienced a number of firsts throughout the 2013 elections. The CFB's voter education and engagement work expanded significantly for the 2013 elections, including the work of our Voter Assistance Advisory Committee, and I'd like to commend the chair of that Voter Assistance Advisory Committee, who was honored by Common Cause New York this week by receiving the Democracy in Action Award from Common Cause. Thank you. Congratulations, Art. New York City Votes, our voter education campaign, became the banner for all our programs: the citywide debate program, the multimedia voter guide, the video voter guide, and our many direct voter outreach programs, including our new NYC Votes app, providing mobile assistance to voters throughout the city. We will discuss our work in those areas later this morning. The CFB developed new tools aimed at connecting candidates and voters alike with the resources they need to participate easily and meaningfully in the city elections. We'll discuss our voter education programs and the ways that technology can be harnessed to improve our democracy during the afternoon session. The 2013 elections were the first with a disclosure requirement for certain expenditures made by independent groups. We'll discuss the effectiveness of those rules and the role independent spending played in the elections later today. Our first panel will focus on the city's public matching funds program. The program matches small dollar contributions up to $175 from New York City residents with $6 in public funds for every dollar contributed. The 6-to-1 match means that a $100 contribution may be worth $700 to the candidate. The aim is to increase the value of small contributions to campaigns, amplify the voices of everyday New Yorkers in our political process. Our initial analysis shows that the 2013 elections were a success for the program, with a significant increase in small dollar contributions and contributors from 2009. Participation in the program was high. For the primary elections, 87% of the nearly 200 candidates on the ballot were program participants, In the general election, nearly 2/3 of the candidates on the ballot were program participants. The board dispersed $38.2 million in public funds, the highest total since 2001. Those public funds helped encourage competitive contests up and down the ballot. The primary contests for City Council were the most competitive, where the winning candidate earned less than 60% of the vote.
Give you a chance to rethink.
Where the winning candidate earned less than 60% of the vote since 2001. The board paid $11.3 million to 129 candidates for City Council, which featured the most competitive primary contests since 2001. Just 1/4 of the Democratic primaries went uncontested, compared to nearly 40% in 2009. Matching funds also played a role in the first competitive Republican primary for City Council seat since 2001. An overwhelmingly majority, 73% of contributors during the 2013 elections made small contributions of $250 or less. Public matching funds also encourage candidates to seek contributions from New Yorkers. More than 2/3 of all contributions raised during the 2013 elections came from city residents. Public matching funds and contributions of less than $250 accounted for more than half of the net spending in the 2013 elections. The impact of the public funds and small contributions combined was even greater in City Council races, where those sources accounted for 74% of the money spent by participating candidates. Our aim in this first panel is to discuss whether public funds program increases democracy in our city and provides candidates with resources to help them make their case to voters. Now I'd like to call on our distinguished panelists to share their thoughts on the effectiveness of the campaign finance program from this cycle. We will hear from Michael Malbin, who's the Executive Director of the Campaign Finance Institute, an independent, nonpartisan think tank. He is also a professor of political science, specializing in campaigns and elections with a focus on the role of money in politics. Also, we have Dick Dadey, the Executive Director of Citizens Union, a nonpartisan, independent nonprofit that has served as a watchdog and advocate for good government in New York City for more than 100 years. Welcome.
Glad to be here.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. Am I on?
You are on, Michael.
Okay.
And your mic's on too.
Good. Thank you, Chairperson Gilhern and Mrs. Chang and Davis and Ms. Loprest. I really appreciate your asking me to testify. I've been writing not just about campaign finance in general nationally, but I've been writing about New York City for a long time, and talking about this program all over the country and other countries. And the first chance to do so officially before this body, and I appreciate that. About a year ago, we published an article in peer-reviewed election law journal that was entitled "Small Donors, Big Democracy: New York City's Matching Fund as a Model for the Nation and States." I attached that as an appendix to the testimony.
Excuse me.
And I'll give a brief overview of not only of what we've learned through that article, but an update for 2013, and then I want to talk about some problems that are likely to be looming over the horizon. I will talk about some problems looming over the horizon.
Your mic on?
Is this now it's better, much better. A little background before I launch in. In almost every jurisdiction in the country, the bulk of campaign money comes from large contributions. Campaign Finance Institute has analyzed all 50 states, as well as federal elections. In the median state, 14% of the candidates' money in the most recent elections came from donors who gave an aggregate amount of $250 or less. New York State, it was 7%. For the U.S. House of Representatives, it was 10%. Beginning in the 1970s, some governments began looking at public money to replace large contributions, put on contribution limits, put some public funds in. And many of the early programs used one-for-one grants, like New York City. By the 1990s, however, it became clear that candidates still had their main incentive was to raise large contributions. Two different approaches were introduced at the turn of the century to address this. One is the clean money system, which supposedly was going to give candidates full public funding, and the argument was, let's drive private money out of the system. It was never possible to drive private money out of the system. Independent spending is protected. Candidates voluntarily can choose not to participate. The other approach was New York City's, which was to switch from a single one-for-one match to a multiple match. Three states, and all three of the states with clean money systems and New York City, tried to compensate for candidates who did not participate by offering extra money to ones who faced opponents who did spend more. The Supreme Court struck that down. The multiple match system, though, in New York City, what we found, what we wrote in the article that came out about a year ago, and in subsequent articles, clearly had the following effects when compared both to the previous one-for-one system and when compared to other systems. One, they have increased the proportional importance of small donors. Two, they've increased the number of small donors who participate, the number of people who are involved in the system. Three, they help shift the demographic and the class profile of those who give. The article only went through the elections of 2009, but Table 1 in testimony, do you all have that or not? Okay. Page 3, Table 1, gives you the preliminary results for 2013. These numbers are not exactly the ones as Amy just gave you because she included all public funding, and she talked about contributors. We looked at people whose total contributions aggregate to a certain amount, and this is the proportion of funds that come from those people. We also only are talking here about public funds, in each column, public funds that were triggered by contributors who fell in each of these categories. So what you see is, as in past years, the matching fund system is associated with the fact that candidates raise much more of their private money from people who aggregate to $250 or less, small donors, more than a third, 37%, and that by itself would be extremely high compared to any other state or city. When you add in the allocated matching fund, those donors are worth more than 60% of the city council candidates' total money. And these are city councils. We use legislative bodies as a way of comparing across states. The proportions also go together over the years with this increase in the number of small donors, and more small donors means more people participating in the process. And as I said before, the program is not only about numbers. The small donors are different in kind. If you can see this in Table 2 on page 4. The small donors come from almost every neighborhood in the city. The neighborhoods have lower incomes, higher poverty rates, and more non-white residents than the neighborhoods that house the large donors. Those results are even more dramatically portrayed in maps published in the work Donor Diversity Through Public Matching Fund, which was a joint study done by us, Campaign Finance Institute, and the Brennan Center. And a copy of that was also attached as an appendix. But just to tell you the method for that, we compared city council candidates with assembly candidates. They had completely overlapping potential donor pools, and the assembly candidates had an extremely low percentage of their money coming from small donors. The city council candidates raised 23 times as many donors in Bedford-Stuyvesant as assembly candidates. About 20, I don't remember the exact number, from Chinatown, and 14 times as many from South Bronx. It was a substantial impact. But even though the results are impressive, especially at the city council level, I do want to point out that it doesn't work the same way across all offices. Page 5, table 3, will give you the percentages, the percentage of private funds. Haven't yet allocated the public funds. Percentage of private funds coming for small donor for candidates for the mayor. You're looking at 8% for all candidates instead of 37 for the council. 7% for Mayor de Blasio, 8% for Christine Quinn, 8% for William Thompson, 16% for Joseph Loda. So it's even the preliminary data make it clear that the program works differently for different races. Public funding does bring benefits to citywide races, such as improved competition, lowering the candidates' dependence on private money from large donors, but small donors are not playing the same role for citywide candidates as they do for city council. And that's going to be important if you consider revising the program, the subject I'll turn to. The program has had major successes. And it is, as I say in our article, it's one that we hold up as a model. But one reason it's been successful is that every 4 years, this board has been willing to ask hard questions and to adapt to new problems as they arise or as you might foresee them. And I think you're going to need that ability as you look forward to issues that have only now begun to arise. The most important ones relate to independent expenditures after Citizens United. Now, independent expenditures are no reason to abandon a successful program, but the expenditures are likely to grow no matter what kind of system you have. The best defense against outside spending is to cultivate small donors and volunteers within a constituency. I've testified and I continue to believe that New York City Small Donor Matching Fund is a good model for New York State and for others. But I think the city should consider some modifications. First, the city strengthened its independent disclosure requirements for 2013, but the disclosure for 2013 is not likely to be enough for 2017. You could go much further by requiring the disclosure of the ultimate source of funding, as well as by strengthening rules about independence and coordination. Minnesota this week, adopted a rule saying that if a candidate helps raise money for an organization, that constitutes coordination. Other new regulations to govern coordination and single candidate PACs are included in proposed federal legislation that I'd be happy to share with you, to send you a copy. So I think you need to review that subject, and I'd be happy to have further conversations at another time. I think there also needs to be a review of spending limits, as well as mostly of the interplay between spending limits and other parts of the public financing system. I'm not saying it's not working now, but the question is, how will candidates react if you start seeing six-figure independent expenditures run by single candidate PACs, not just by the kind of traditional PACs you see, and these things are sprouting up. The Supreme Court overturned the compensatory program and funding. Therefore, most proposals for new programs do not include spending limits. The theory is there's no harm in spending per se as long as the money comes from small donors. I agree with this argument, but it's not so easy to apply. The fact is you're pursuing more than one goal. Candidates have to feel they can defend themselves against independent spending or they won't come into the system. It's a voluntary system. You have a high rate of participation now, but when the compensatory limits were removed, Arizona participation dropped quite a bit in the first election after they were removed. But just dropping spending limits creates a risk. And you'll see why if you look at the mayoral numbers compared to the city council. If you only abolish the spending limit, arithmetic tells you that citywide candidates are likely just to mobilize large donors. No reason for them not to. So if you want to serve both bowls, it's rather tricky. And you may want to think about raising the matching amount to 10 to 1 instead of 6-for-1 and raising the first $100. You may want to lower the contribution limit for participating candidates. I'm not putting that out as a firm three-part platform, but I'm recommending that you have to come to this new campaign finance world willing to ask some really big questions, because these are really big changes. And once, if people drop out and start depending on independent expenditures of single candidate PACs, it's going to be really tough to retrace your steps. So you need to look forward, not backwards, not just congratulate yourselves, and I do congratulate you, but you need to think about new issues that we can all see emerging. Thank you. I'll be happy to answer questions after Dick.
Sure. Do you have copies of my testimony that just,
Yes,
okay,
thank
were
you.
just distributed, okay? Can you hear me? That sounds, okay. So, good morning, members of the New York City Campaign Finance Board. My name is Dick Dadey. I'm the Executive Director of Citizens Union, and welcome to and congratulate Rose Gilhern as the new chair of the Campaign Finance Board. We look forward to working with you and your colleagues in improving the Campaign Finance Board system over the next couple of years. Today's panel discussion is focused on the strengths and the weaknesses of the New York City public matching system for funding political campaigns. My comments here today will focus on the strongest part of the system, the electoral competitiveness and voter choice for the City Council, brought about because of the opportunity candidates have to participate in the public matching system. We will present research comparing the competitiveness of the 2013 elections to previous cycles in New York City, as well as to the state legislative elections, noting the advantages conferred by the city's public financing system. While focusing on testimony on competitiveness, we recognize there are other important strengths to the system, such as lower campaign contribution limits, needed transparency through effective disclosure, spending caps, robust and independent enforcement, and increased participation by New Yorkers in our electoral process by making contributions, knowing that their smaller gifts will result in public matching funds to the candidates they support. New York's system is not, however, without its challenges, including the rise in independent expenditures, such as my colleague Michael Malbin just mentioned, the rise in the importance of influence of bundlers as a result of the city's program limiting the size of contributions of lobbyists and those doing business with the city and making ineligible their matching, ineligible for matching their contributions, and the inequity in the law governing institutional contributions between unions and corporations. Our testimony concludes with recommendations to further improve the system by addressing these and other challenges. We also are in the process of developing further recommendations to address these and other challenges that we'll share with you in the months ahead. But let me focus on the competitiveness of the races here in New York City. New York City and New York State's campaign finance systems, as we know, are very different in structure, which provides dramatically different results for voters in the city. For city council elections, voters have had the benefit of choosing among more candidates who are better able to get their messages out due to the public financing system. For state legislative contests, choices are much more limited, as state races do not have the benefit of public financing. This speaks to the strength of the city's campaign finance system, which includes not only public funding, but reasonable contribution and pay-to-play limitations, as well as more robust disclosure. In 2012, we released a report, Fair Election for New York, How Public Financing Creates Greater Choice and Competition, which showed the difference in choice and competition between state legislative elective contests within New York City and those of the City Council for elections taking place between 2005 and 2009 for the City Council and 2006 to 2012 for the state legislature. Our updated research, which we're presenting today, includes the 2013 City Council elections and reveals the following major findings. In comparing the council to the state legislature, less than 1 in 12 council races are uncontested in the primary and general elections, whereas in the state legislature, that figure rises to 1 in 5 contests are uncontested. Of the council primaries, 59% of them had 3 or more candidates. Less than 20% for the state legislative primaries had 3 or more candidates. The third finding was that the council has a 94% incumbent re-election rate, whereas the legislature has a slightly higher one of 96.5%. In terms of comparing the council elections of 2013 to previous council elections, in 2013, 56% of the council members faced primary challengers. That's about the same as it was in 2009, but up significantly from the rate in 2005, where it was nearly 39%. Of the 17 incumbent council members who faced contested primary elections, 3 of them had more than 4 candidates in 2013. That is a drop from 2009, where 10 out of 24 contested races that featured an incumbent had 4 or more candidates running. And we only saw 1 council incumbent, Sarah Gonzalez, lose in 2013, while in 2009, 5 incumbents lost. That may be due in part to the fact that term limits had been an issue in the 2009 election, when 4 of those council members had voted in favor of extending term limits. But obviously the public matching system provided competitive campaigns for the challengers to get out their message. As noted in our major findings, a major structural difference exists between the city and state systems in that members of the city council are term limited. There are no term limits for state legislators, and given that term limits create unique dynamics of when challengers choose to run against incumbents, a challenger, for example, may choose to wait may wait to run for a seat only after an incumbent is term limited out. Citizens Union took that into account by looking at several of the metrics above, as they related only to races involving incumbent or open seats. It should also be noted that New York City saw a change in petitioning requirements in 2010 after the voters approved a charter amendment to reduce petition signature requirements, particularly for independent candidates, making it less likely for them to get onto the ballot. These issues are discussed and detailed over the next 10 pages. I'm not going to go through each and every page, but I would like to draw your attention to the graphs, which are much easier to follow and much nicer to look at. And I want to commend my colleague Rachel Foss, who is here with me from Citizens Union, who prepared much of this research and assisted in the preparation of this testimony. If we look at Figure A here, you'll see the competitiveness in the primary elections between the city council and the state legislature. You'll see that the number of contested primaries for the council was 62% between 2005 and 2013. It's exactly the opposite in the state legislature, broken out by the Assembly, the state Senate. The numbers are small in terms of the differences among them, but you'll see that it's almost turned on its head the competitiveness of those in contested primaries, owing to, I think, the availability of public matching funds. If you look at Figure B, you'll see the figure I mentioned earlier, the number of contested incumbents, a number of contests in which incumbents were challenged by challengers. It was low in 2005. In 2009 and 2013, it shot up. Obviously, and remember, this is incumbents. This is not open seats. And that may be owing in part to the increase in the public matching funds from 4 to 1 to 6 to 1, allowing challengers more opportunity to raise the kind of money needed to run a competitive campaign. If you look at Figure C, you'll see that it also has an effect on the general elections contest, not nearly as stark as in the primary, but that there is a higher percentage of uncontested general elections still in the legislature as compared to the city council. If you look at Figure D on page 5, you'll see the percentage of uncontested New York City Council election general races and how that breaks out. There were in 2005 there were nearly 30%, 28% of the general election contests did not have a challenger. That changed in 2009 and 2013, significantly, in fact. So that's worth noting, too. In terms of the next page, Figure E, you'll see the number of uncontested seats, both in the primary and general elections combined. showing that, again, another way to show that the council seats the council faced fewer uncontested elections, both in the primary and general election, compared to the state legislature. In figure F, here's the graph that shows that there were a greater number of candidates per primary election between 2005 and 2013 when compared to the Assembly and to the Senate. In G, on page 7, you will see the composition of incumbent primary elections in the comparing them to the state assembly and to the state senate. You can see how in the city council, the races with 2 candidates, with 3 candidates, with 4 candidates, it was pretty tightly packed there. Whereas in the state assembly and the state senate, most of the races only had 2 candidates in them, and very, very few of those races had candidates with 3 or 4 challengers. If you turn to page 8, you'll see the average number of candidates in an open primary race, that when the seat does open up and candidates do come forward, that we're going to see a higher average number of candidates over this 8-year period from 2005 to 2013 running for city council than we do either for an open seat in the state assembly or the state senate over that same time frame. In terms of the composition of city council primary elections from 2005 and 2013, combining both the incumbent and the open seats, here's a telling chart on page 9, figure I, that looks at all the incumbent races and the open races, and looking at the number of candidates in each of those races. The takeaway from this is that even in incumbent races, there are significant challengers coming forward as well. In terms of the incumbent re-election rates, we don't see as many incumbents getting beaten, but if you're a state legislator, you have a greater chance of winning re-election as an incumbent than you do in the New York City Council. Just going down, you can see the comparison in the middle of the page in terms of the candidates that ran in 2005 for the City Council and lost, the incumbent Alan Jennings. In 2009, we had 5, and then in 2013, we only had 1. And you can take a look at the comparison to the number of state legislative seats that were lost by an incumbent. Some of them, as if you take a look, had corruption charges against them, so that was a factor in their defeat. And if they were not charged with crimes such as or had ethical problems like Ada Smith and Efrain Gonzalez and Pedro Espada and Shirley Huntley, the incumbent re-election rate in the city would have been much higher. So that is a factor that needs to be taken into account. You'll see a breakout of the by year on the following page, figure K, the incumbent re-election rates between 2005 and 2013. If you have a moment, you should read the narrative. It'll be much more explanatory and give you a little bit greater depth, but that gives you a quick purview of the impact on competitiveness that the city's public campaign financing system has, both within the city council in comparing it to other elections and comparing it to the state legislature. But competitiveness in itself is not an aim. What we really are about here in trying to create more competitive elections in the city is a more effective democracy, a better representative group of public officials reflecting the will and the wishes of the electorate. In 2009, the city council finally represented or mirrored rather closely, and this chart is not as good as it needs to be. We plugged in the wrong one at the last minute, but if you take a look at the first couple of columns, you'll see that the city council representation in 2010 closely mirrored the city population. That was the first time that the council demographics matched up against the population demographics in New York City, and that was a significant achievement. We believe it to be the same in 2013, and that is owed in part to the public funding system in New York City, and the result that has in encouraging challengers. The other interesting thing we're going to take a look at that came through as we were doing some of this research is to take a look at the City Council today. It's I think younger. I don't think it's just because I'm getting older, but I've gone to a couple events, and it has struck me as to how much younger the City Council members are, how much better connected they are to their communities and to their neighborhoods than their predecessors were. If you look at the 2001 election and those who came in 2002, there were a number of family dynasties. There were a number of people who were chief of staffs or other elected officials who came into the council. We do not see that as much in 2013. I don't have the facts to back that intuitive assumption up, but that's what my gut is telling me, and I think that's that's the ultimate goal, is to be able to allow people who care about how this city is governed to have the resources to run for city election. And it's reflected in the makeup of the City Council, and I think that results in a more effective democracy. And as we look ahead, we have a couple recommendations that you've heard from us before, and they begin on page 12. And they're broken out in some major categories here to address the rise of campaign spending by independent political committees and other nonprofit organizations. We believe that the council or the CFB should propose and the council adopt a law similar to the kind of stand by your ad disclaimers used in federal elections for both independent expenditures and electioneering communications. Such a law would require disclaimers identifying the top funders whose contributions pay for these outside groups' political spending if their contributions surpass a specific dollar threshold or represent a percentage of the independent spender's overall budget. It's appropriate for the number of donors required to be listed in a given communication to vary depending upon the medium used, obviously. Council member and now Deputy Speaker Brad Lander has introduced a bill in the council aligned with this principle of disclosure. Also requiring disclosure of an independent expenditure by any person or political committee within 48 hours of a contract being made arranging for this expenditure. Who would have thought, but this great state of West Virginia actually has passed a law accomplishing this. We could only aspire to do what this great state does. Number 3, require any entity making independent expenditures to acquire approval from its board of directors or organizational leadership body and to report such expenditures to its shareholders or members and make make the report public on its website. In terms of some of the other recommendations here, addressing the impact of contributions now raised through bundling, there was an important shift I felt in 2006 when we started to limit the size of the contributions from lobbyists and those who do business with the city. We saw a shift from those who give to those who raise money, those who get. And we need to address that, and one possible way is to prohibit the contributions bundled by lobbyists from receiving matching funds and ban placement agents from bundling donations for any elected official directly or indirectly. And then also prohibiting participants in the city's campaign finance program from using public matching funds to purchase strategic campaign consulting services from firms that also are registered city lobbyists. And then to enhance electoral competition, establishing war chest restrictions to limit the transfer of funds from one race to the next. And then also to educate voters and encourage participation. Obviously, it would be a great idea if we could broaden the voter guide to include all contests occurring in the city, such as state and federal elections, as does the intro bill of 769 of 2012, and also providing voters email notification of upcoming election dates, deadlines, and availability of sample ballots, which bill, intro number 613 of 2012 did. So thank you again for holding this hearing and providing Citizens Union the opportunity to present this information and provide this testimony. Thank you.
There's a suggestion about requiring the disclosure and independent expenditures of the ultimate donors. I want to explore how that would work a little bit, because let's say the independent expenditures is by the Committee for Good Government.
Right.
Who knows who they are. And their donor, one of their donors, is the Committee for Effective Government.
These are, by the way, pretty close to real examples.
I understand. I understand that. So then we have to figure out who are their donors.
Right.
So how would you do this? In other words, how do you actually get to the ultimate donors where people, maybe I'll talk like a former prosecutor, where
Nope.
was launder the funding of independent expenditures through a series of entities, so that we really know who is behind it.
Yeah. First, I'm going to recommend, and we'll be happy to share, an article, still in working paper, from a law professor you probably know, and I know he's worked with you in the past, Richard Berfault, who has an excellent recommendation on this. But this is, by the way, the limitation or the problem with the stand by your ad provision, which kind of looks good, but what you're going to get is that the Citizens for Good Government paid for this ad, and our top donor was the Citizens for Effective Government. The provisions I have seen introduced that seem most effective and borrowed by some states, including Connecticut, come from the Federal Disclose Act, which came one vote short of passing. And they essentially say that if A gives to B and B has either made an independent expenditure in the past, then unless you specifically exclude your money from political use, then you are subject to having your donors above a certain threshold amount disclosed, and that will be traced back until the original donor, unless after Citizens United, the original donor is a corporation, which is disclosed, or if it's a labor union, which is disclosed. But that's what it means to trace back, either to a natural person or a corporation or a labor union. And it means
entity.
Yes, and however many layers it takes. And a donor can preserve anonymity by saying, don't spend it on politics. And the other way an organization can protect itself is through a device that takes no more than 20 minutes to do, which is have a separate checking account into which people can give money for the purpose of giving to other entities. And organizations will want to do this because trade associations do not want to disclose their dues from members, and that's fine. But it's not that hard to draft or administer. People don't like it because they like to preserve anonymity, but there are good examples out there of draft language and good experience in a couple of states.
I can't take issue with that.
Do you think that the program has enough safeguards against public funds going to candidates who face minimal opposition?
No. I think it's very difficult, however, to establish those benchmarks. There were a number of proposals in 2006 that got very concrete that were rejected by the city council that Citizens Union at the time supported. It all comes down to judgment, and I think that we should once again try to really get more concrete because incumbent council members are very wily about making the case for why they fear, a third-party challenger winning election, even though they've got a very strong record and the third-party challenger really hasn't raised all that much money. So I think it's another area that should be examined to try and limit the outlay of public funds to relatively non-competitive elections. So.
I don't have anything to add. Okay.
I have a question. So it's clearly important to have. Is the microphone on?
Yeah, it should be. So I think you have to be really
Is this
close.
better?
You have to eat it. Is what you have to. You have to eat it.
Thanks for the
I
advice.
tend to turn a rock
Okay.
stage.
So clearly, the matching finance program enhances competitiveness, and as you pointed out, increases the connection between the representation on council, in particular, and the demographics of the city. But is campaign finance alone enough to create a competitive landscape? And are there other things that you think the Campaign Finance Board should be doing to create more of a level playing field to bring those candidates to increase the competitiveness of the second and third candidates on those ballots?
One, no, it's not enough. As Dick Dadey pointed out, there's a substantial increase in the number of contested seats, not necessarily in incumbent defeats. Incumbent defeat is not a goal in itself. Contestation is important because it requires an incumbent to defend him or herself, and therefore gets the citizens involved, and that's important. Anything you do, by the way, it will cost money, but anything that you do which increases the information that voters have about candidates will disproportionately help the less well-known candidate. So your voter pamphlets do it, but if you can think about other ways of distributing the pamphlets, other media for getting the pamphlets out, that will all serve to help competitiveness. It's in essence an equally distributed subsidy for getting information out. And by the way, once voters have the level of recognition and knowledge of their candidates that approaches, let's say, U.S. Senate races, then independent expenditures are less effective.
I agree that voter information is not as strong as it should be, and I know that the Voter Assistance Commission has done a wonderful job of using new technology to increase access to information. I think that an increasing body of thought says that not only do we need to remove the hurdles to voter participation and remove the hurdles that candidates face in getting onto the ballot or waging competitive campaigns, but we need to, create the kind of communication that goes on among voters themselves. I think the campaign that the Campaign Finance Board with the Voters Assistance Commission, NYC Votes was a great start that should be strengthened and improved, and resources should be put into that. I also think that there needs to be greater removal of burdens to voter participation, something outside of this board's purview. But access to the ballot for candidates was strengthened by lowering the number of petition signature requirements in 2010. That was a good step, and it wasn't sometimes when a novice candidate running for election looks at the ways to get onto the ballot in New York City, and sometimes they think it's just too difficult to even attempt, so they don't. I think there are other burdens to voter participation that can be addressed again outside of this, and I'm not going to miss this opportunity to promote the idea of nonpartisan elections, where it's amazing that so few people participate in probably the most determinative election in the city, and that's the Democratic Party primary that essentially results in the election of most elected officials. Opening up the elections to all, regardless of party, and still preserving candidates' identification with their political parties. I think you'll see people feeling like they've got greater choice and their vote counts more by participating. Early voting, extending voting over a course of number of days, making it easier for voters to cast their ballot when they have the time to cast the ballot. Also, the idea of there was another idea there, Art, and it just slipped my mind. So excuse me.
Can I take a second shot at that, if I may?
You're going to support nonpartisan elections?
No,
Oh.
I'm going to, because I think a lot of your suggestions are worth considering, but they're under state control, some of them.
Right.
But one thing that is more under your control, when I talked about dissemination of information and knowledge, I think you can do more with your website. And you do a great job of getting out information about money. But it's a platform. It doesn't only have to be a platform that that people have to go to. You are also tweeting. You're reaching out. That's good. But I don't know if you would run up against other institutional barriers. But since you are pushing and not just being passive, why not make it a basic platform for information about candidates? Now, you're not going to put out the candidates' messages, but you could provide links to all candidates who are on the ballot. You could make it easier for voters to put in their address, and from there you can get to say, okay, this is my council district, here are the candidates, here are the candidates' websites, and from the candidates' websites you can get to make an electronic contribution that can be matched much more easily, but you can also find out all the information about the candidates. You can do this in a way that does not favor any candidate or any approach, but automatically, by making it equally accessible, you favor the ones who have less resources.
Mr. Malbin, I want to look at Table 1.
Sure.
In the context of your suggestion that we at least think about, your tentative suggestion, go to 10 to 1 for the first $100.
Mm-hmm.
I want to make sure I understand Table 1, which is the percentage from individuals whose contributions the candidate aggregate to, and looking 1 to 250, which is, I guess, the definition of the small donor.
Yeah, we did pick that to be comparable across states.
Right. So I'm looking at 2001, which seems to me to be the most comparable election to 2013 because of the number of open seats, where when it was 4 to 1 match, it was 68% of
Yes.
came from that, and it's 61% when it was a 61 match, and I'm not sure, so I may or may not be understanding the chart, but what is the implications?
No, you're absolutely right.
10 to 1?
I don't, we didn't detect a huge impact from moving from 4 to 6. And one of the big impacts we noticed from shifting to 250 to 175 is that fewer than 1% of the donors gave $175, that exact amount, in 2001 or 3, and half of the 250 donors migrated to 175 in the other election. No, I see it as part of something worth considering as part of a package that also looks at contribution limits and also thinks about the spending limit issue with respect to independent expenditures. I do think dropping the matched amount to 100, and let's say if your contribution limit were 1,000, that it would change the dynamics. I don't have empirical proof of that because nobody has that kind of ratio. It would still mean that your maximum amount per transaction was still $1,000, but I think you'd end up bringing more donors in, and you'd end up spending more. But you're right, and what happened in 2001, of course, is that you had new term limits, lots of open seats. So that is the highest year for small donor impact. You're right in pointing that out.
Can I just ask you a question about the correlation between, a lot of discussion has been talked about in new programs that are being proposed about not including a spending limit,
Mm-hmm.
and I guess, it always struck me is that, the danger of doing that is that if you have a high contribution limit, then it just encourages, a race for money,
Yeah, I agree.
people who have access to that money is, so would you say that it's really that lowering the contribution limit and either increasing or eliminating the spending limit are kind of twin proposals that, to keep the number of small donors still in the system, still high, you would have to do kind of both of those things together.
Yes.
Agreed. Yeah. I mean, but we need to, with the rise of independent expenditures, I don't think we've got the answers yet on how to mitigate, the overwhelming impact that independent expenditures have on, candidates who are, complying with the law and, doing the best they can. I think that, this is, it's an area that Citizens Union is beginning to take a look at over the next month or two. How do we mitigate independent expenditures without undermining the public matching system here in New York?
I want to say that when I picked the number of 1,000, it was not meant to be a rock-solid proposal. However, it's not out of thin air. The proposed federal bill that's closest to the New York City model is the bill introduced by Representative David Price and Representative Van Hollen. And that's essentially what it does. It takes the contribution limit for participating candidates down to half the level of for non-participating. And you might just want to lower it for everybody.
And so I guess I also just would commend people when tomorrow we'll be posting all the written comments on our website, so everyone can look. And we have some testimony from Mark Schmidt from the New America Foundation, who was originally scheduled to be on this panel, that addresses some of these issues of the relationship between the public fund and independent expenditures. And so, if people are interested in that topic, I commend them to look at this testimony from Mark Schmidt.
Great.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
What? Oh, that's right. I'm sorry. If we have comments or questions from the floor, we'd be happy to take them.
Did I hear you say that this testimony will be posted on your website?
Yes.
Okay, great. It's hard to follow
Without having the
sorry.
charts, yes. Yeah, both of the testimonies will be posted on our website. All the testimony that we provided, written testimony, both delivered here today or submitted, it will be on the website. Does anyone have any question for our panelists?
Hi.
You're on.
You're
Hi,
on.
my name's Ben Max. I just wanted to follow up on the city council matching the demographics of the city. I think that became true for African American and Latino representation, but I think, if I'm not mistaken, when it comes to white and Asian representation, there's still a huge gap where there's only 2, I believe, Asian American members of the city council currently, and whatever would be missed there in the match is then redistributed into the white representation in the city council. So I think it would just be interesting to think a little bit about political participation in the Asian and Asian American community in the city, and how the Campaign Finance Board might get information out in those communities.
As a clarification, I believe our figures were looking at voting age population and registered voters. So.
Thank you. Do we have any other questions? Sir.
I have a question. My name is David Kayode. I was a candidate in my district. Why is it so difficult for those newcomers to get to the matching fund, despite the fact of submitting every necessary thing that asked for, and where they couldn't get their own easily? They can make use of the money on time, while the coming one won't get his money until maybe 2 weeks before the election. How can you help to make it easy for those people that come in to be able to get their fund on time? So, because we have most of the new people that they have, the community want them, but that election is money. If you can't get money to do what you have to do, you are nowhere. So I want to know how you will make it easy for the newcomer.
I'm not sure
I'd
that our
say
panelists
yeah,
actually
I'm
have
not-
any thing to say on that, but,
Because I didn't know where you started.
okay, sorry. So we have,
That is my question.
yeah.
It's not, I don't know the
Yes,
answer
yes.
to the administration
Yeah.
issue, but it's an important question.
Yes,
so.
I mean, so, we will, we can, I mean, when you testify later in the day, and we can talk about that, and address, we, obviously, the staff tries very hard to make, assist candidates and to make it as easy as possible to qualify for the public funds, and a large percentage of candidates received public funds in this past election who are, participating and seeking public funds.
But there is later an open session.
Yeah, there is an open session, so
for
we'll
all
talk about it.
comments not linked to the panel.
Yes.
Yeah, and
Okay.
this, I'm not answering this question because I don't know the answer. I do want to say that it's very important for non-incumbent candidates that a board have a division that's set up to reach out, to play an ombudsperson kind of role, and this board does. But that's extremely important. A lot of boards do not have it. And can you do better? I don't have the information.
Does anyone else have any questions, particularly for these panels, about the effect of public matching funds in small donor democracy? If not, we're going to let them leave, and we'll call our next panel.
We really have to go back out in the snow? Jeez.
Dick, you're welcome
It
to
looks like
stay.
it might have slowed down.
not as
but-
bad.
It's not as bad, no. Thank you.
Thank you.